My name is Melissa Jeter, Librarian Specialist for the Art Tatum African American Resource Center, located in the Kent branch of the Toledo-Lucas County Public Library. Welcome to the Art Tatum African American Resource Center's Oral History Project, the Edrene Cole Collection. Dr. Edrene Cole was a local African American historian and educator who began collecting the stories of noteworthy Toledoans in the African American community. With this oral history project, the Art Tatum African American Resource Center honors her memory and her work. Join me and University of Toledo Professor of Anthropology, Dr. Willie Mckether, as Toledo's very own African Americans share the stories of their lives.
Hi, I'm Dr. Willie Mckether. In this segment, we're pleased to welcome attorney Eddie Cole. In addition to being one of Toledo's top legal scholars and practitioners, Attorney Cole is a surviving husband of educator and historian Edrene Benson Cole. Attorney Cole, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Attorney Cole, there's a lot that I would like to cover with you, including your life with Mrs. Cole, but I'd like to first begin with your life because, as indicated, you've had your own distinguished career as one of Toledo's top attorneys. So let's begin with some of your early roots. I know that you were born in 1920 in Belzoni, Mississippi, to Walter Cole and to Tenny Williams Cole. Do you have any siblings?
Siblings, yes. My sister, Narvel Gross.
Okay.
I had two other sisters who died in the flu epidemic of 1919.
Okay.
Bessie and Leola. They were very young, under 5
okay.
at the time.
Okay. That must have been devastating for the family, I would imagine.
Yes, it was.
Okay. Okay. What kind of work did your parents do?
My father was a farmer.
Okay.
In those days, if you don't have any money, you call it a sharecropper.
Okay.
And you work for others, and you get a share of what is produced. Allegedly, what you get a share.
Okay.
And my mother was a hairdresser, a teacher, and as time moved on and the Depression came on, of course, my father died in 1930, and then you have to do what next best, which is you start as a day worker, my mother did, washing and ironing clothes. And we had, for say, a self-employed laundry. Okay. We did washing and ironing for other people.
Okay.
And my mother also cooked for other people.
Okay.
And had employees in that respect, you know.
Okay, okay. And let me go back. As a sharecropper, because I think I've heard stories of how others have, in sharing the crops, when it came to settle up time, they never broke even.
That's very true, very true. My experience, of course, in that respect came after my father died.
Okay, okay.
A friend of ours named Eason, who lived in the neighborhood, had been a farmer for many years,
okay.
Had lost and had gained back, and then in 1929 he lost again. And I convinced him that if he would teach me how to be a farmer, I would go back with him and we would have a sharecropping together. He had 2 boys about my age.
Okay, okay.
And we did.
Really?
And we worked, and at the end of the harvest season, we were told that all we would get would be 1 shirt to be worn by all 4 of us interchangeably. That was all the cash we would get. That's 1 shirt.
Really?
But we had gotten, say, food for 3 months, for March, April, and May. And then, of course, in June, in the summer months, you raise your own food.
Okay.
Supposedly, if you had in it, you raise your own vegetables and so forth.
Sure, sure.
But the advance was only for 3 months. And anything else you got at the store was on your balance that you would get at your half.
Okay.
Which that evaporated, of course.
But do you think people may have rigged the books so that you would not break even or have a profit?
Had to. They had to. You got no receipts, you know. Everything was verbal.
Okay. Okay.
No receipts, nothing to back up.
Okay. What do you think would have happened to people had they challenged the bookkeeper's numbers, or did it ever happen?
Well, I'm sure that number one is that most sharecroppers needed a place to stay. And it was fortunate that we were close enough to the field that my mother did not have to move out, and I walked to the field.
Okay.
But many people had to really move, and if you challenged, you lost your house. In other words, you lost a place to stay.
Sure, sure.
And usually that would not happen until the wintertime, until after the harvest season. So you would be out looking for a place to live during the wintertime. So many people say it's better to have a place to stay than not.
Than not. Wow. That must be really difficult. Must have
Yeah.
been difficult for people
Yeah.
back in those days.
Right.
Did you ever pick cotton?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. You pick cotton by the day. You catch the wagon in the morning or the truck in the morning, and you about 5 o'clock in the morning, and you go to the field and you stay there until almost dark.
Mm-hmm.
You get back home. You go to the store and you get your crackers and you get your something to drink and take your bath, and you'll be back next morning at 5 o'clock.
Was that hard work picking cotton?
Very difficult work.
Was it?
Because you have a sack, you're in the sun, all of the shade trees have been cut down. Everything was, in other words, in a cotton field, it's just nothing but cotton for miles. They have already deforested the land, okay? Which was not good for the environment.
Sure.
It was not good for the workers either.
I can't imagine that. That's a pretty long day out there in that hot
Right.
sun. Well, now, did you ever have to miss school in order to pick cotton or work in the fields?
They didn't have to do that because the school system accommodated the picking of cotton.
Okay.
Basically, for African Americans, the school would open in September, but they would just mark time. Most of the students didn't start until the first Monday after Thanksgiving.
Okay.
And then that's when most of the children came to school. You would have to take makeup tests from the all during November and December and so forth until January. So you made up.
You made up for it.
Right. But in the meantime, the entire school was on a slow pace.
Okay.
So you wasn't going that fast anyway. Okay.
Okay, but they made sure that there was an allowance for children to pick cotton, stay in the field.
Right.
Okay, good. Okay, now at some point your family moved to Greenwood, Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
Is that where you attended most of your school?
That's right.
Okay.
Greenwood.
Okay. Were the schools at that point segregated?
They were.
Okay.
They were.
Okay. Do you think that the education you received at those schools was on par with the white schools?
Well, I wouldn't say on par from a physical point of view,
Okay.
because the white schools were better built. I'm talking about our school until it burned down. It was a Rosenwald school, which means Julius Rosenwald had put up half of the money to build the school.
Okay.
It was a wood school,
Okay.
made of wood. Of course, you realize that whether it's wood or brick doesn't make any difference. It's what you do in school that counts.
Sure.
But that school burned mysteriously during the time that the WPA were building schools. So it was built by the WPA. In other words, the federal government
Okay.
built the schools. The local people did not, the local merchants and homeowners did not build the school. It was built by the federal government.
Okay.
That was the high school, okay?
Okay.
The elementary school had been built back in the 1890s, so it was an old school.
Pretty sound.
Yeah. But the idea is that for anything above 5th grade, the local merchants and homeowners did not finance those schools. Julius Rosenwald financed those schools.
Okay.
And other benefactors.
Okay. So then the government then helped to ensure kids were educated.
Right.
Okay. You mentioned a couple people who was Mrs. Wilkes, who was your principal.
Wilkes, right.
Mrs. Cage, Mrs. Jordan.
Right.
What was significant about those teachers and that principal?
They were really sincere about teaching.
Okay.
They instilled within you a desire to learn. They inspired you. And also they used a strap to enforce it too. So it's not just a matter of you doing it if you want to do it.
Okay.
Okay.
Good. Okay, let's talk a little bit about church as you're coming of age in Mississippi. Was church an important part of your life?
Very important part. very important.
Okay.
I attended Sunday school. I attended the church. In fact, in Sunday school and high school, I demonstrated the blackboard, which means that I drew the pictures illustrating Christ's crucifixion and other things of that nature. And if called upon, I had to explain to the audience what they meant.
Okay.
I attended what is called the youth fellowship in the afternoon. Those names have changed, of course, over time.
Certainly.
But at night, they also, at that time, had what is called a vesper service for adults. And of course, when the adults go to church, the children go to church too.
That's right.
There was such thing as children staying at home and adults going to church and that type of thing. Because in the wintertime particularly, you had to have fire in your house.
Okay.
And parents would not leave the children at home with fire in the stove and so forth.
Right,
It was real fire. It wasn't gasoline and so forth, no gas heat.
Those are real log fires.
That's right, log fires. And we have, if you had a stove, it still was red hot. So it would be dangerous to leave the children there with that kind of heat.
Okay.
So the children went to church. And then in the summertime, with the permission from my mother, my sister and I would go to the Walthall Church, in other words, the CME Church.
Okay.
And then go across the railroad tracks to the Baptist churches, and then lasted to the Sanctified Church, which started around 11 o'clock and lasted until midnight or more.
So you were in church all day, possibly?
And you saw your friends, yes, and you listened to the music, and more people were outside than were inside in the Sanctified Church and so forth.
Sure, sure.
Because there were a lot of music, a lot of tangerine playing and so forth and that type of thing.
So then the church was indeed then not only a place spiritual, but also a place social for black people in those days.
It was.
Good, good. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about race relations in the South.
Okay.
How would you characterize race time in the South in the time which you were growing up?
Well, race relations, unless you had a contact with white people, you probably would not be aware of some of the dangers. But you were taught, if you saw a white person coming on a sidewalk, walking, step off the sidewalk completely. Don't even think about brushing shoulders or getting too close. So you were taught in advance to step off the sidewalk, give the whole sidewalk to them. Everybody, of course, would, as you got older and wore hats, you tipped your hats to white and black, as far as that's concerned.
Okay.
I worked for a company that started at the age of 14 called Piggly Wiggly, and I had an opportunity to as a what you might say, a bag boy, take the groceries out and so forth, unload trucks and so forth.
Okay.
And deliver groceries to the houses.
Okay.
To be in contact with people and so forth. And there were some that were nice and some were not. There were some that would generate a feeling of friendliness and some would hatred. Okay.
Some people have said that as white children became older, they were required to address their friends, sometimes the same age, as Mr. or Mrs.
They would.
Was that your case also?
That would do it. That was frequent, yes. Okay. That was challenging, very challenging. Yeah. Yes.
I can imagine it would be. Let me ask you this. What does it mean to stay in one's place? People have said that in the South, people had a place to stay in, and I stayed in my place. What does that mean exactly?
Well, that means that as far as a person could see, he knew where the boundaries were with reference to how to speak to white people. They wanted to say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, and so forth. They do that. There were no streetcars in our city, so there's no place about riding in the back of the bus. You walked everywhere.
Okay.
You had your own transportation. But there was the movie theater. We went up the fire escapes. In other words, in order to get a ticket, you went to the side where you would have a person in the window, but to go up into the theater, you would go up the 5 escapes. You wouldn't go up inside of the theater. You go up the 5 escapes and then into the theater. And upstairs, of course, was divided. Whites on one side and blacks on the other. But downstairs, all whites.
Really?
Now, you paid the same, as far as I understand now, the same amount of money. There was no difference in the prices, but the accommodations were quite different as far as getting up and the danger, if a fire happened, of getting out.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I just wonder, I know this has been a number of years, but how could that have made someone feel to know that, look, I'm human like you are. I'm paying the same fare, but yet I'm being forced to do something that I know is not right.
Well, you have a choice. If you challenge the system, more than likely you're going to be put in jail. All right? You're going to have to pay a fine, eventually get out and be blackballed by other employers if you're going to work in that area as being sassy, uppity, or something of that nature. So consequently, you're going to pay a price. Now, logic would tell you that maybe this is not the best way to use my life. It's a different way to challenge that.
Okay.
And because you're challenged frequently.
Sure.
Okay?
Okay.
You got to pick your fights.
Pick your fights.
Yeah.
So then you don't think that, well, let me rephrase it. Were men cowards then because they didn't challenge everything?
They were not cowards. They were just looking at the best fight that they could have with their life. In other words, if you got one life to spend, are you going to spend it on somebody calling you a nigger? Are you going to spend it on that?
Okay.
Are you going to get a good whipping trying to defend yourself on that? No.
So
When I went to college and the bus driver saw that I was going to college, he took my suitcase, which was made of pasteboard, and he threw it so hard in the back of the underlying portion of the bus that he broke these. It was cardboard anyway, so all my clothes were out.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. Now I wanted to hit him, but I'm not going to college if I hit him.
That's right.
No,
That's right.
I'm not going to college if I hit him. So the best to do is get my stuff up the best way I can and get on.
So it was a choice.
What?
It was a matter of making the right choices.
Yes, right.
Could African Americans vote in Mississippi?
In some spots. Now, this is how Mississippi was situated. There was basically only one party that really was functioning. It was a Democratic Party.
Okay.
But the Republican Party officially had delegates, and they could vote in some counties. At Mount Bow, which is all black city, town, that was established by the ex-slaves of Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy. They had a town. Around that town, they could vote.
Okay.
My wife's grandfather up in Marks, Mississippi, voted. But he voted because they dared not to let him vote, see?
Okay.
It was exception.
Sure.
Generally, blacks did not vote, okay?
Okay. Now, in the area in which you came of age, at some point you started the American Legion, and you had ambitions of voting.
Right.
What happened in that situation?
Well, at the end of World War II, when I came home, I had the option of going back to college immediately or to stay at home and work and find out really how it was going to be to practice law in Mississippi. So I wanted to find out firsthand what were the conditions, how did people make a living, what were they doing. And one of the things that would happen is that there was no American Legion there. So we wanted to establish the American Legion. And along with a group of other veterans, we petitioned for the establishment of it. In the meantime, there was, in Jackson, Mississippi, the headquarters for the American Legion of the white people came to convince us that we didn't need a national American Legion connected with Washington, but we would be an auxiliary of the white American Legion. We would report to them. Our convention would end in Jackson, Mississippi. We would have no vote on a national level. We rejected that. And of course, that upset quite a few people because many of the businessmen were members of the American Legion.
Sure.
But we were successful. They brought in a black man who had more stars and stripes than General MacArthur, but he was just a figurehead.
Sure.
He really had no connection with the American Legion nationally.
Okay. Okay. Did there come a point that's through the American Legion where you attempted to register to vote or register others to vote?
It was a part of what is called the Civic League. In Greenwood, the National Association for Advancement of Colored People did not exist, not because they didn't want one, but because that would be too flagrant a violation of the tranquility, so that we had what is called the Civic League, which is a watered-down name for the same goals as the NAACP.
Okay.
And one of the things that we discussed was voting. And I volunteered to take 8 men to register to vote. Of course, I knew where the courthouse was and so forth. And my experience had been working downtown, knew where to go.
Okay.
So we went and we registered, and we were received very nicely.
Okay.
But after that, I noticed that someone was following me at a distance. And I talked with my mother and I explained to her what had happened. And we talked about alternatives, whether or not I could bring a gun in the house. She said, no, you could not bring a gun in the house. So I could not have a gun outside of the house and be of ineffective defense. So the end result was to leave and to go to Chicago for the summer and work, possibly as a Pullman porter, because college students at Tougaloo had an inside track on being Pullman porters.
Okay. Okay. But let me go back, just so I'm clear though. So are you suggesting then that you left Mississippi because you thought your life was in danger because you registered to vote?
I did. Yes.
Wow. Okay. That must have been a difficult situation to deal with.
It's very difficult, yes. To leave home, to be forced out, yes, sure.
Okay, okay. But now, I don't want to get too far ahead. That was after you had gone to the service, though?
That was 1946.
Okay. So let me go back. What did you do after you finished high school?
Went to college, Tougaloo, Mississippi.
Okay.
Yes.
So from Tougaloo, then you went to the military?
Military service.
Okay, and that was during World War II?
1943, March of 1943, through January 1946.
Okay, okay.
I was in the Philippines, Japan, New Guinea, and originally stationed at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, then Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. I took my basic training in engineers.
Okay.
And then I went to the engineering school for a surveyor at Fort Belvoir, Virginia in 1944. And then I came back to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and was sent to New Guinea.
Okay, okay. Let's just talk about that military experience just for a moment. Am I correct that you served in a segregated unit?
Oh, yes. Segregated unit. Most of the units had white commanders, but the 33rd Engineers had 1 or 2 black lieutenants in charge, and I served under one.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then in New Guinea, and we served under black officers at that New Guinea.
Did you really?
Yes.
Okay, okay. How did people from a different country treat African American soldiers?
Well, in the Philippines, they were very, very friendly, but the American white soldiers imposed their own segregation. Say, for instance, if a young lady was a member of a family, and usually there'd be more than one girl in the family, and one dated a black soldier and one dated a white soldier, the white soldier would put the pressure That couldn't happen. She had to drop the black soldier, or he would leave out. Okay.
Really?
In other words, it would be. In other words, the family had to either be all white or all black. Had to go for all white, all black.
Wow.
That was now that was not official, but that's just what the soldiers did.
Right, right. But that was only in particular countries.
Now that was in the Philippines.
In the Philippines.
Now
okay.
in Japan, it was different. The Japanese were much smarter. Okay. The Japanese in Tokyo, downtown Tokyo, had not been touched. It was just like Times Square in New York. It had never been touched with a bomb or anything.
Really?
The American soldiers, who really were the occupation soldiers with guns, we didn't have guns. They took our guns. Well, once the war was over, when we landed, our guns were put in the rack and locked up. But the American soldiers were infantrymen, and infantrymen were really the occupation soldiers. They could have guns. They set up segregated. It wasn't really segregated. What they did, if they had a nice nightclub, a nice cafe, they would have at the door soldiers with guns and ask you, what unit are you with? Well, blacks were mostly with quartermasters or engineers, something like that, quartermaster particularly, all right? He said, well, this is only for infantrymen, which means that you are not in the right group. You're a soldier, you're an American soldier, but you can't go in because you're not an infantryman, okay? And the infantrymen control a lot of the establishments that you want to go in for entertainment, okay, and for food and so forth.
Sure. But it meant still that you were still segregated, though.
Yeah, you were still segregated, not officially.
Not officially.
But by the soldiers themselves. I mean, I'm talking in terms about the way it was set up. Who controlled the land? The one who had the guns. I mean, if you said, don't come in here because of such a thing, and you got the gun and you don't have one,
Decision is made.
You're going to get back out and go for somewhere, walk up and down the street, you know. Yes.
Let me go back so that I'm clear. They took, whose guns did they actually take?
See, all soldiers had guns. All soldiers had rifles, M1 rifles.
Okay.
Okay. But at night, you would put your rifle in a rack, and then the sergeant would lock that rack. Okay. The next morning, you would get your guns out at the proper time and go out to wherever you had to go. But our guns were put in the rack permanently. Okay, and locked. Okay.
Okay.
And we had to go out and work and do whatever we had to do without guns.
Without protection.
Without protection. But now the Japanese were very nice. When we got on the streetcars, and they had a very nice transportation system, they would get up, men and women, and give you a seat, black as well as white.
Really?
Give the soldiers a seat. It's a lot of different than what we have in Iraq today.
Sure. Sure.
They were very friendly. They invited you to their homes. They were very courteous. If they wanted your shirt or wanted your jacket, the Eisenhower jacket was very popular. They would follow you all over town to try to buy it from you, that type of thing.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So that's your military experience. When did you get discharged from the military?
The 31st of January, 1946.
Okay. So then you were in the military. You've been accepted at least to an extent by other people from other countries. When you returned home in 1946, what conditions did you find here in terms of race relations?
Well, things had improved a little bit from a point of view that we were allowed to go in. We traveled from Los Angeles to Camp Shelby, Mississippi, in non-segregated conditions, okay? White soldiers and black soldiers and so forth, returning. And then when we got to Camp Shelby, for the first night, it was not segregated. But the next day, the soldiers, the white soldiers, found got to themselves and so forth, okay?
Okay.
But you weren't at Kelp Shelby very long. You got the discharge and left. We found that at home, my former employer invited me back to work. He greeted me and so forth, and I was happy about that. I believe that generally, the atmosphere was a little different, friendlier, okay?
Okay.
But basically, the underneath that was the still that was segregated, because you're still segregated.
Okay.
But the tension wasn't there.
Wasn't there.
Yeah.
Okay, but how about you as a man, as a soldier? Did you feel differently? Did you have a different kind of attitude when you came back from the service?
Well, I had, because of the fact that Dr. Jernigan, who was the president of the National Baptist Convention, was sent to Japan as a special envoy for President Truman to interview the troops in preparation for issuing the desegregation order of the Army.
Okay.
And he came to Yokohama, where we were stationed, and we told him of the segregation that we had experienced in the Army. He said, well, you're talking about this. What are you going to do when you get home? What are you going to do when you get back home? And the end result was is that if you don't challenge some of the things, they're going to be just like they were. You have to go back home. You have to ask for change.
Sure.
Okay? So you came back with an idea that would be change.
And you wanted change.
You wanted to change, right?
Okay. 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 Let's fast forward a little bit. Now, I know that you arrived in Toledo May 31st, 1946.
I told you about the experience. My mother and I decided to get out of Mississippi, come to Chicago.
Okay.
Arriving in Chicago, I arrived at friends of ours that I had not seen since the 1930s. They were Beatrice and Billy Caldwell, schoolmates.
Okay.
They didn't know I was coming. I arrived there about maybe 2 o'clock in the morning, and they received me well. They knew who I was and so forth, asked me no questions
Really?
other than come on in. And the next day we went out to the Bud Billiken Parade. The Chicago Defender had a parade that was sponsored by really the people that operated Amos and Annie in those days, you know.
Okay.
But it was still a part of the Bud Billiken Parade. Very nice. And since I was there, and I said, well, I have spent one day that I thought I could look for work because I didn't have a lot of money. I said, let me go and see my sister in Toledo, and then I'll come back and look for work on Monday. So I came to Toledo. I had a ticket.
Okay.
And I got to Toledo and found my sister very easily. The cab driver took me right to her house on Fernwood. And her friends convinced me that since I didn't have a job in Chicago, why not look for a job for 3 days in Toledo, and then if I didn't find one, to go back to Chicago.
Okay.
I found a job on the 3rd day working for Fred Edrene Construction out of Local 500.
Okay.
And that's why I'm here today.
Okay. You're still here. Okay. Okay. Now, let's talk about your law school career. At some point, you're in Toledo. You finished law school in 1951.
Right.
How did you choose, why law and why the University of Toledo?
Well, I really had planned to go to Howard University. But after my experience in Mississippi, I came to Chicago and then to Toledo.
Okay.
My sister had told me about the University of Toledo having a law school and having some lawyers here that were very outstanding. Jesse Heslop and Slater Gibson and others. I went out and visited the law school, met the dean, who was Dean Fornoff. I had my transcript that I had carried with me throughout the military service, but he was the first one that asked about it and wanted to see it.
Okay.
And he accepted me in the law school if I wanted to go right then. I told him no, I wanted to finish my undergraduate studies. He took me to the dean's office and introduced me there and showed him my transcript and everything. And actually, I started that fall of 1946 in the undergraduate school. I had to spend 12 hours with the university in order to get a degree.
Okay.
Although at that time, including my military service and training, I had enough to get a bachelor's degree without any further training. But the requirement was that I had to have 12 hours at university in order to get a degree.
That's because you had gone to Tougaloo earlier in your military.
Tougaloo, military service with Fort Belvoir, Virginia, and I did correspondence studies with the University of Iowa.
Okay.
While I had military service as well.
Okay, good. Okay, so what was your first job then once you finished law school?
After I finished law school, I was still working for the city as a collector investigator for the city of Toledo, and then later as an internal auditor.
Okay.
But I graduated in June, passed the bar in August, and started full-time practicing law in October 1st on my birthday in 1951.
Okay, good. Okay, now, at what point did you meet Edrene Benson?
In 1955.
Okay, and how did you all meet?
Well, I was ushering at church, and she came over to visit, and I offered her a ride home after the church, and we struck up a friendship there.
Okay. Now, was that customary to offer all people a ride home?
It was not customary. It was not customary.
Okay. So you met and you married July 31st, 1955.
Right.
About 9 months later.
Right.
Thereabouts. Okay. Did you guys have any children?
Yeah, two children.
Two children.
A son, Edwin, born in 58, and a daughter, Alicia, born in 1966.
66. Okay, great. Any grandchildren?
Yeah, grandchildren. I have two boys and a girl.
Okay.
Two boys by my daughter.
Okay.
And my son has a daughter.
So who's the oldest?
One is 13, my grandson.
He's the oldest.
13.
Okay, good. Okay, let's talk a little bit about race relations in Toledo.
Okay.
We talked about Mississippi a little bit. Was there a big difference in race relations in Toledo versus Mississippi?
Great difference. A great difference.
Okay.
Say in 1946, you didn't have a whole lot of clashing. People were coming in. Mm-hmm. Housing was, you rent rooms. You didn't have apartments. You rent rooms.
Okay.
And so consequently, you were together in small areas. Blacks had their own club, the Waiters and Bellman's Club. Mm-hmm. You could not go into hotels downtown and get a room. But I don't believe many blacks tried that. You couldn't get a room at the Y downtown. You were given at the Indiana Y, you were sent to the Indiana Y to go to the Y. So basically, you knew the pattern. Or if you didn't know the pattern, you found out the pattern what to do. There were not clashes at that time. The clashes came, well, let's give you an experience. When I graduated from college in 1947, I was working for the Autolite first. I went to they were posted at the university that the Autolite had an opening for someone in my area, okay?
Okay.
I went over to Hamilton Street and I asked to be interviewed for the job. Mm-hmm. The lady said, "There's no such opening here. We don't have that here." Okay, I knew better. I just read the announcement.
Right.
But that's the type of thing you get. You just got, you were delayed. You were told it didn't exist.
It didn't exist.
Right.
Well, but were there like restaurants that people couldn't go to in Toledo, as far as you recall?
There were restaurants that mostly that would serve you the last person. You go into a restaurant, you wait to be served. If there was crowd, you would be the last person waited upon.
Really?
Okay.
Okay.
You would have to go to a restaurant at a time when there was very few people in there. Okay. Mm-hmm. To get any kind of service, to get into quick service.
Okay. Sure.
Everybody, you were invisible. Everybody came in, got ahead of you. Okay.
So they looked right through you.
Yes, they walked right through you. Okay. Now, they were on the books in the early 50s. a $50 fine for anyone to discriminate against you, but you would have to go and file a criminal complaint, have a trial. If you won the case, the $50 wouldn't go to you, it was a fine. And the $50 went into the clerk's office.
Yes.
And there were Van T. Sherrill, one of the undertakers, outstanding undertaker, did that for a restaurant that was on Madison Avenue. They refused to serve him. And it was publicized, of course.
Sure.
It was a $50 fine, that was all. Then later on, of course, they had the Civil Rights Commission and so forth, but that didn't start until the late 50s.
Late 1950s.
Late 50s.
But were there any local groups that were pressuring authorities to enact laws to eliminate or to stop?
There were
something?
local groups. You must remember that many of the local people had become complacent, okay? They knew these things existed. They knew their way around. They knew how not to be embarrassed. Now, L.P. Stewart, of course, took on the theaters in the 40s and 50s, but L.P. Stewart was just only one person.
Sure.
Now, she broke it down for herself and maybe her friends, but generally, when I went to the World Theater, which is 1100 block of Dorr Street, with that nice theater, I was directed to go to the balcony, okay? I went to the balcony, I looked down, I saw empty seats. I came down, I told the young lady that I saw empty seats, I want to go on the first floor. She didn't tackle me. I went on and sat down on the first floor.
Sure.
But they directed you to the balcony.
Until you challenged it.
Yeah.
Was there a local NAACP?
The local NAACP came to life. I mean, the local NAACP had been established in 1915, had done work, Jess Hesterman and others, Ben Fisher. But I imagine, to a great extent, they survived and did what they could. In the early 50s, the NAACP was revived, okay? And their membership began to grow. By 1957 or so forth, Reverend Roach became the president. And he became very aggressive.
Okay.
And he challenged Steel Test. Steel Test was an ice cream company that sold milk and ice cream. And they did not have any drivers who were black. But in those days, they delivered milk all over the neighborhood.
Sure.
And we wanted just one driver. And Steel Test says, no. They called their lawyers. We went in, Reverend Roach and several of us, I was with the group, and they said, if you don't get out of here, we'll call the police. So we had to get out, of course, quickly, and Reverend Roach then led a boycott of Steel Test products, and the boycott worked.
Did it really?
And Steel Test came to us, and eventually, of course, the driver was put on. The beer companies followed on, the pop companies followed on, and of course, you know what this
Okay.
was.
So then you were instrumental in helping to eradicate some racism
Yeah.
here in Toledo.
Oh, yes. And then, of course, in the early 60s, the NAACP continued with new life. Frank Troy became president. I was vice president, and we challenged the apprenticeship training program. There were 1,000 students in the apprenticeship training program, which were roofers, carpenters, bricklayers, and so forth, and there was not one black.
Really?
And we only wanted one black, and they turned us down. And we were able to file a complaint. They brought in the Hobart Taylor, who was with the Civil Rights.
Okay.
At that time, it was in the office of the vice president. And Lyndon Johnson was the vice president at that time, 1963. And Hobart Taylor said, if you put it in writing, what you're telling me, he was at the Commodore Perry Hotel. He said, I will see that we follow up on it. And the NAACP authorized me to write the letter and the complaint. He responded. They sent a man in. Dick Gossard said, was not going to happen, but it happened.
It happened.
Yeah.
You know, that's interesting because some people I've spoken to have said, well, you know, there really wasn't any racism in Toledo.
Well, that's a perception. You know how it is.
Sure,
The
sure.
perception.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but what you're saying though that there was.
That was.
There was.
In the school system and so forth, there were in certain schools there were no black cheerleaders. You could play football, you could play basketball, you could be on student council, you couldn't be a cheerleader. We broke that down.
How about black teachers? Were there many black teachers?
Black teachers were assigned to schools that were predominantly black students. We filed a complaint in the late 70s about teacher assignments and student assignments.
Mm-hmm.
And we won on the teacher assignments,
Okay.
but the student assignments, they could not trace that to be actually intently done by the Board of Education. But they did find that teachers were assigned to black schools and only to white schools when they became a certain percentage were black.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we were able to break that down.
Break that down as well. Wow, well, good. Okay, okay, good. Well, let's switch gears a little bit here again. Dorr Street was a lively place to be.
Very much so.
At some point. What are some of your memories of Dorr Street?
Well, Dorr Street was really about 7 or 8 blocks of small businesses, some large businesses, a few residential homes, stretching from really Division all the way to Detroit Avenue,
Okay.
including filling stations, theaters, restaurants, grocery stores. And then the late 60s, after the riots, Reverend Cup organized what is called Christian Brothers, which was a group, a financial group. And we raised about $28,000 or $30,000 in the community. And I believe it was 10 of the biggest companies in Toledo put up $10,000 apiece.
Really?
And had a fund which meant that you had about $138,000 available. We bought a red and white store. Now the red and white store was going to be torn down because Dorr Street was going to be widened.
Okay.
But at least for 2 or 3 years, we had a red and white store.
That was owned by African Americans?
Yeah, called Christian Brothers.
Christian Brothers?
Christian Brothers.
Okay.
Reverend Cup was the president of that.
Okay.
We owned what is called at that time they had a stove and refrigerator. They had a name for it, but it's a franchise that you got from General Electric.
Okay.
We had that on Dorr Street. And Mr. Billups was in charge of it, but we were able to get that financing for him. That was where you sold new refrigerators and new stoves, new washing machines and so forth.
Okay. Okay.
And then we had a McDonald's on around the 3100 block of Monroe Street. They just tore that down, and recently they put a service station there, but it was a McDonald's. But Jim Cooks managed that for us.
Okay.
And that was one of the franchises that came after the riots of the 60s. And then we had, in Franklin Park Mall, we had a restaurant there. It was it's a hot dog. You sold hot dogs out there. And we had that for a couple of years. But the things began to collapse. The hot dog place, McDonald's felt that there was conflict with having the McDonald's and then having a hot dog place too. So we had to let the hot dog place go. We did that at a loss.
Sure.
Because Franklin Park Mall was just opening up. We had put a lot of money in it.
Yeah.
And interior decorating and so forth. And so we sold that at a loss.
Sure.
And we're not able to sell it to anybody in our group that had the funds, so we were not able to do well with that.
But what I want to just highlight though here is that you had a group of African American men
Right, men and women.
and women who came together and jointly owned something.
Yes.
And owned it profitably.
Yes. Yes.
So I think that's significant to point out
Yes.
because some people think that's impossible to happen.
We happened. Yeah, we did that. And I eventually, what happened, when the store on Dorr Street, which was the grocery store, that had done very well, but Dorr Street was going to be widened, and that was going to be torn down. We understood that.
Sure.
But we had about 3 years of it.
Okay.
We bought Zeitlitz. Now, Zeitlitz is across Upton Avenue, and it's about 3 blocks up across Upton Avenue going west. It was a manufacturing of Polish sausage. Zeitlitz itself is a Polish name.
Sure.
Blacks did not eat Polish sausage to any great extent,
Sure.
but they had a contract with Foodtown to sell Polish, manufacture and sell Polish sausage to Foodtown. Foodtown had stores in Ohio and Michigan. When we bought Zeitlitz, Zeitlitz had its own men who knew how to make Polish sausage. Now, black men, we didn't know how to make Polish sausage.
Sure.
But Reverend Cup said, we don't have to know how to make the Polish sausage. All we have to do is sell them. But the truth
That's right.
was is that the federal government had told Zeitlitz, and the Zeitlitz seller had not told Reverend Cup that they had to have a federal inspector on the site 24 hours a day. In other words, you had to pay for the inspector.
Really?
But that means that the thing wasn't profitable.
Sure.
You had to pay for an inspector for that small operation.
Sure.
And Foodtown said, if you can't have a federal inspector, I cannot take it across state lines because what I take has to be saleable in Michigan as well as Ohio.
Sure.
So that was the beginning of the closure, because the groceries that we took had to be given away because people hadn't gotten the word that the grocery store we had been transferred to Zeitlitz, and that Zeitlitz, although the name didn't change, it was black owned.
It was ownership, right? Change.
And people didn't get the word out in time. Now, perishable items can last just so long.
Sure.
So that you could have your canned goods and so forth, but your perishable item won't stand for a week.
That's right.
A time. You got to get rid of them. So that was the beginning of the closure when they bought Zeitlitz, and Zeitlitz had already been told that their products could not go across the Michigan line unless they had a federal inspector. Okay. But in negotiating that, Reverend Cup had his own idea that this man who sold it to us was a Christian, and they had breakfast together, and they had type of thing that he would tell everything. He would tell him everything.
You became at some point prominently known for became known for your law practice. Talk a little bit about how your law career eventually unfolded.
Well, basically, my idea is that the law was to serve to improve the people, improve the conditions of the people. And it was my belief and my idea to use the law practice to make it better for the common person, the people who really couldn't afford a lawyer, and those who could afford but were just on the very end of it. And consequently, I gave a lot of time to helping with the Legal Aid Society, and I became president of the Legal Aid Society. But not only that, but I was on the board of the Legal Aid Society when its total budget was 30-some thousand, and stayed on there until its board was over $1 million.
Okay.
Okay? So consequently, the idea was to give something back to the community, build something that would help not just blacks, but help all poor people in that respect. I attended Bar Association meetings. I became active in the associations. I became secretary of the Lucas County Bar Association in the early 50s. And then, of course, in the early 90s, I became president of the Lucas County Bar, which is mostly whites. In other words, that for attendance, there are very few blacks who even attend,
Sure.
but they were members.
Sure, sure.
And then I was active in the Toledo Bar Association, which is a large bar association, and now has over 2,000 members, 2,000 lawyers in the area that are affiliated with it, but has about 1,500 members. And I was on the executive committee of that, and I worked with the committees, and I helped with various types of programs, including the observation of, at that time was a Constitution Day
Okay.
in September, and worked with other efforts to get lawyers to, say, improve the service to all people,
Okay.
and observe Law Day and so forth. And then, of course, I wasn't an organizer, but I was early member of the Thurgood Marshall Law Association, which is a group of black lawyers. And we have presently in the neighborhood of 50-some black lawyers
Okay.
and some judges in this area. And served as secretary and treasurer of that for a number of years, and on the board and so forth, and still active in it.
Okay.
And then, of course, at various times I supported the American Bar Association, became a life member of that, as well as a life member of the Ohio State Bar Association, and attended meetings. I'm talking in terms of Ohio State Bar Association annual meetings and so forth.
Well, it sounds as if you've been very active
Yeah.
Throughout your career, and even so much so. The one thing I'd like you to talk a little bit about, if you can explain how the University of Toledo established a scholarship, the law school, I think, in your honor. How did that come about?
Well, number one, I supported a lot of activities of the law school. I was a member of the law alumni board of, what is right to say, alumni board for a number of years, and was president back in 85, 86. But not only that, but in 1994, the National Bar Association, which is the black bar of the nation,
Okay.
elected me on nomination from local lawyers here to the Hall of Fame,
Really?
National Bar Hall of Fame.
Okay.
And at the end of that, the Thurgood Marshall Law Association and the Lucas County Bar Association and the Toledo Bar had a reception for me at the University of Toledo, and out of that grew the formation of this scholarship
Okay.
that Toledo Bar funded with some $30 or more thousand at the time,
Okay.
which now has grown to over 60,000
Wow.
at this time.
Okay.
And that money is used to provide scholarships for law students. And the Thurgood Marshall Law Association has banquets every 2 or 3 years to supplement that, to give contributions
Really?
to that. Plus the individuals should do that.
Okay. How does it feel? I mean, to have your colleagues to recognize you in that way,
Makes us feel very good, yes. I'm humble, yes indeed.
but
Yes.
but very deserving.
Well, thank you.
Very, very deserving. Okay, Attorney Cole, as we begin to wrap up, let me just ask you a couple of quick questions about Edrene, if that's okay.
Okay.
Edrene spent a good deal of her life on history, documenting African American life in Toledo.
Yes.
What was her passion? What caused her to do that?
Well, I believe that there was a desire, number one, on her part, to really bring to the people the desire to don't be ashamed of yourself. Now, many people coming from Mississippi denied that they were from Mississippi, okay?
Sure.
They were ashamed that they had lived in the South, that they had lived under segregated conditions and so forth. And she said, you don't have to be ashamed of that, your background and so forth. Don't be ashamed. Know who you are. Know your history. Know what you contributed. That though you were there, you contributed to something. At that time, cotton was king. You helped America maintain its kingdom.
That's right.
You know,
That's right.
You contributed to that. Although you get very little financial out of it, but you you also contribute to the prosperity of America, and not to be ashamed of yourself. And then, of course, later on, she was researching and tried to find something about local history on blacks, and there was nothing. So when it's that, then you help create something.
That's right. That's
So
right.
she worked with that, and she was working on her master's at the time, and she asked the dean in charge of that, would that be a proper project? He said yes.
Okay.
And Jack O'Hearn was his name.
Okay.
And she went forward on that.
Okay.
Yes.
Very nice piece. I've read it. Very nice piece. And
thank you.
all the work was just outstanding work. So I want to just I want to ask you because I figured you would know her passion more so than anyone else would.
Okay.
Is there anything else about Edrene that people generally don't know that you can share with us?
Well, she had a great desire to help young people go forward. She worked with the ACSO group. That means the Academic, Scientific, and Cultural Competition of the NAACP, because she wanted to highlight some of the great talent that you have right in Toledo.
Right.
And she won at least 3 national prizes with people in Toledo in architecture and drawings, in I think poetry and so forth.
Is that right?
Yeah, right now out Toledo.
Okay.
Now you realize you have a lot of singers, a lot of good singers, but to win nationally on a singing group, you have to be very, very good.
You have to be great. That's right. That's
But
right.
you had architects, and you had those in science and other designs and so forth. You know,
Okay.
it was very important.
Okay. Good.
And then back in the late 70s, there was a group that known as Tots and Teens. They were really out of California. And we visited California, and they asked Ms. Gorns from Toledo, and she was interested in that.
Okay.
And Edrene came back, and they established the chapter here
Tots and Things here.
at that time.
And she was also active in the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority.
Oh, yes, yes,
of
indeed,
course.
she liked that.
Okay.
And all the activities that involved youth, because they had many programs for youth also.
Sure.
Yes.
Okay.
And
good.
the links.
And the links. Okay.
Okay.
Well, good. Again, I never had the good fortune of meeting her, but it's through this kind of work that I'm hoping to be able to continue the work that she had started.
Okay.
And so I thank you very much for taking time to talk with us this afternoon.
Okay. Been my pleasure.
Well, thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Okay?
Thank you.
All right.